So yeah, I'm here working at the borough. We've done a bunch of these passage projects, mostly in partnership with the state Fish and Game and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and all the other partners and players involved that everyone's been mentioning throughout the last. I've been here for about 8 years now. So my next slide is just a quick background. And first, I want to start with a personal story. It's not listed here. Basically, so I grew up in Palmer, fishing all the creeks and rivers around here, and I've seen firsthand the decline of the salmon numbers around here. And a couple years out of college there, I was actually hanging out with my brother, and we were complaining about all that, where fisheries are closing for sport fish, limits were limited, and basically we were just sitting there watching a fish decline. And I was just sitting there complaining, and eventually he just said, look, we can sit here complaining, or what are you going to do about it, right? And I didn't have this plan. The way I got into this role was basically an accident. But looking back at that, I just feel I'm glad to be here helping, right? And so it's an important program. I'm really happy to be a part of it. I take it very seriously, and I've seen a lot of success. So when he said, why don't you do something about it, or what are you going to do about it? I'm glad to be sitting here telling you, here's what I'm doing about it. So that's a little bit of that background, kind of some personal investment to this. And I'm sure a lot of you feel that same, I guess, rewarding feeling. So just a little more background specifically then on the program that we run here. Most of the funding comes through Fish and Wildlife Service grants through the federal budget. There's some other organizations when they have money to dole out, like the Fish and Game or the Sustainable Salmon Fund. And then we usually procure or help leverage, those grants with the local taxes throughout the borough here, set by the assembly and just funded through local property taxes. This next point of over 100 fish passage projects in the last 12 years, that's a rough number. And I think the borough, or at least on borough owned roads, is not all 100 of those, but I think that is within the borough. And it's pretty accurate. And it's just kind of I think it's a pretty cool stat. I've been here probably for about 30 or 40 of those maybe. And so all of the borough, they're working on these things for a long time, but that is still a pretty new program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but anyway, about $1 million per year over the last 3 years, including the local match and the grant money. And I would just point out that it's been a lot higher in the past when the state and federal budgets are flush with cash and the priorities are set for this kind of thing, which I think right now with all these new bills and things and the higher oil prices and stuff, we'll see another increase over the next few years. I have a slide about some of the precautions that the borough has taken basically to try to limit so a lot of what we're doing in this program is repairing old problems that were created by developers and contractors who are building roads that didn't necessarily know how to do it in a sustainable way here. But over the years, we've kind of caught that, recognized it, and it's pretty unique that, basically the borough's adopted this ordinance 2 times now, first time in 2014 and then an update in 2020. It survived or maybe got improved a little. even for any new development or construction improvements happening on a borough road that crosses anadromous streams. A whole set of, stream simulation and hydraulic design methods kick in. A lot of the stuff you saw today from Jess, a lot of those requirements are basically written in these codes so that we just basically prevent new problems from happening. They're, saves a lot of money down the road and helps protect that habitat as new roads are being constructed through, one of the most, it's one of the quickest developing areas really in the country right now. And it is unique, like I was saying, unique to the Mat-Su, even when you compare it to state and federal standards throughout the country. And I think one reason for that is basically up here, we caught it early enough during the problem as it was progressing that we still have functioning systems that support the salmon runs, the wild salmon. And so even though we had some catching up to do, it's good, I think, to set these examples and require responsible development. So it's a document that lives on our website. It's published if you want to search it. It's called the Subdivision Construction Manual. And my contact is on these slides, and I'm free to help get you pointed in the right direction, or help find this kind of stuff. Okay, so general problems you see with inadequate fish passage structures. If they're undersized, creates high velocity. This can cause perch culverts with outlet drops and scour in the downstream section. Hard for fish, especially juveniles, to move around. Eventually, or even if they're not undersized, if you just basically are neglecting these culverts, they end up failing, being corroded, collapsed, and then even the plugged with sediment, sod, sticks and brush, sometimes beavers. Anytime you have a small culvert, it's just easier to plug, and they're harder to maintain. You can't clean out the insides very easily. I used to have better photos for these 2 points. We lost a lot of stuff in a cyber attack a couple years ago, but if you can picture, so on Cottonwood Creek, I used to have an undersized set of culverts on Cottonwood Creek, which is a groundwater. It's a warm groundwater fed system, I believe, and it flows all winter long under the ice. And if the culvert ends up getting iced up, it basically just backs up and comes over the road. So you get this big glacier over the road. And in this particular section, it was a curve on the road. So really just a hazardous condition that we would periodically send our crews out to. We have basically mobile boilers with on the back of a dump truck. It's a big steam boiler, and we would go steam thaw, or maybe we bring the excavator out there and try to rip through this ice to try and get the water flowing back to the culverts. And I've literally seen people tied off to the bank or the trees, walking over this big shelf ice with glaciering water everywhere. It's just not a good situation. So anyway, inadequate fish passage structure causes flooding. They can get frozen up easier. Anytime you're out doing civil work, especially if it's by surprise, it ends up being very costly, and it's not sustainable for the budgets we run. Another one is private land. So a lot of the creeks come through the private land, cross over the road, and then go back to private land. And so if we're impeding that flow, with our culvert, we can basically sometimes be held liable for any damages on private properties, whether maybe their basements are flooding or, their yards are full of ice or something, which I've seen. And then again, the unsafe conditions for emergency maintenance, whether it's in the winter or summer, not ideal. And a good fish passage design, as we've seen from the drawings on Jess or these requirements in the code, it really just alleviates. I've never had to go back to any of the culverts we constructed, whether it's, all these issues are just dealt with. That just completely eliminates the maintenance aspect. Okay, I have a couple projects to highlight here. This particular one is on Cottonwood Creek. It's not the site that I was mentioning before about the glaciation, but it's just upstream. It's the next crossing upstream. So it's just in one of the residential streets here, Marble Way. And in this particular site, you had a fairly deep entrenched channel through this residential area. And Cottonwood Creek is pretty wide. We have basically one culvert that's, I think, 18 feet wide, and this overflow culvert on the foreground is 12 feet wide, I believe. And then there in the background, you see some white plastic running along the bank there. And so that's your stream diversion. And on this particular project, we actually underestimated what it was going to take to construct that. And turns out we had to cut a change order to do extra work in order to deal with this diversion. And I'll, like kind of said before, I'll say it again, and I'll say it some more later, is the most important thing on any of these projects is to deal with this diversion water and your groundwater. You'll see this excavation here. It's dry. I mean, this elevation of that culvert is probably 3 or 4 feet below your finished grade and where your channel is going to be flowing. So you're digging down below the old creek. You can see that person there standing on the creek diversion, the side of it. That's basically where the natural elevation of your stream. And so you're below that water. So that hydraulic pressure really pushes that water through the ground. And you definitely don't want to see the surface water coming in, and you'll end up filling this whole entire trench within minutes and just basically ruining your project. So dealing with the water in a good diversion is 100% the key for any of these projects. And you can see here on this job, left side there, you have a concrete wall. You had a head wall poured or placed with a footing underneath that you can't see anymore. So there's big spread footers with these concrete retaining walls holding the pipe together, and basically the road will be in between those. In the end, right here, you have a concrete pump truck placing the second head wall. This is that same head wall, probably a few days later or a week or two later. Looking at I'm sorry, this is the downstream side, but similar look. You'll see some more later of the upstream side, but yeah, the finished product of the pipe structure itself, and they're beginning the road work and the bank reconstruction there. This is the same view of the upstream side, basically, that you were looking at before. After it's been placed, the creek is back in the final channel alignment there. The diversion's been backfilled. You can see the soils and everything been placed back where the diversion used to be, and the channel back in the culvert. They're working on some of the foreground here is fresh topsoil and some of root wads that have been placed next to the retaining wall. And some of the bank work here anyway, that's just starting. One thing, okay, I'll mention in this project, you'll see it in the background where all that equipment is sitting, and a little bit to the right of it all. There's a big cleared area. That's all private land. And this site required, I mean, there's a lot of excavation. And when you do that, you really have to find a place to put all that material, right? You're digging out a couple thousand yards of gravel, and you know, you can't really afford, or you know, can't really afford to truck it away. So you need to find somewhere on site to store it. And so this contractor actually just basically knocked on someone's door and said, and they just made a trade and agreement to use their property temporarily in exchange for basically leaving them with a flat pad or whatever they do. We kind of stay out of those deals, but this contractor made that deal with this owner and it worked out. They actually had a screen set up here to produce some of the road material, and just stockpiling the waste material, the excess material, and then just a nice storage yard for their equipment, culverts, concrete trucks, and things like that. So that's something you always got to look for. But again, we leave a lot of that to the contractor. They can get creative as long as they're not, you know, as long as they're following contract and all the requirements. We do have to give them some leeway, also as Jess mentioned, to figure out how to construct these projects and then how to be competitive on bid day. So, okay, this is the downstream side. After basically all the vegetation has been placed, or just the dirt work finished, I don't think this is long after that. They obviously haven't hydroseeded this yet, but down in the bottom of the slope here, you'll see this is the native veg mat. Usually on these projects, before we go and strip the grubbing, we call it out on the plans and specs and things to harvest and store the on-site sod from the riparian areas or the nearby. So that's kind of, I was thinking about this when Blythe was talking about all her stuff about not bringing in invasive plants, right? So whenever you can, we try to literally use the plants that are on site. So we know we're not bringing anything new in. And this stuff just, it really likes these, it's a quick stabilization basically, because you have live plants that you're just placing back where they came from. You don't have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks for vegetation to establish. These are just some of the, finished product. The left side is the inlet, upstream side, downstream is outlets. So you can picture, this is a before of the outlet and there's the after. I think that's probably the next season or later in the year. It's probably the next spring. Kind of by design, you got ferns and all this stuff that's just, it was just harvested from on site, placed right back where it came from. On the inlet side, remember that pile of soil? Those are some brush layers we placed. You see that on the left there, how those willows take off. They'll grow those little willow bushes if they have the right moisture and everything. They'll grow 4 or 5 feet in a year easily. And then just a little, you'll see the sticker shock budget on the bottom here. So 80,000 for a design for something like this, I'll tell you, is cheap. That's probably about half the price we'd pay in this day for something like this. And again, the 700,000 seems high, but he was a low bid and there was a lot of them that are probably over $1 million on this project. So takes money to do this kind of stuff. Okay. Next project. Cloudy Lake is up in the Meadow Lakes area. Feeds into Meadow Creek. So the Big Lake system. Phillips Drive is just a neighborhood road down through here that I don't know if this is a man-made lake from back when or what, but this road is basically the lake kind of just, this road just kind of holds the lake back. And at some point, someone placed, so here's a small schematic of the area here, the project area. So the small pipe on the right, you'll see is the existing or the old location. It's a small, about an 18-inch culvert. And then the stream on the downstream side, those dark blue hashed lines, it just kind of, it braided really fast right after, and it was really steep. So like down to where the stream flattened out, it was just a quick drop. It's hard for salmon to get through. The plan for us was, since we had all this area here to work with, so the left side, that's their new culvert location. We skewed it a little bit, and then we lengthened our channel just to flatten it out and to get within our, I think it was 2 or 3% on this project. We just basically needed a longer channel, and that happens from time to time. We just have to find a way to make a longer channel. And this one, we were lucky enough to have this space available, so we used it. So keep this picture in your head as we're looking through these photos. Here's some problems we see. This is the existing conditions out here. Undersized culvert, high velocity in and outside the culvert beyond. There's no substrate in there. And this pipe was literally falling apart. I mean, you couldn't see through it. The water was, you could probably just barely get through there. It just was in really sad shape. Some more of the problems on the downstream section here, just steep grade coming off the pipe. Tough to navigate for adults and juveniles. And really, really shallow too. At one point, someone tried to put you can kind of see it in that top photo. Someone tried to put like a wooden fish ladder, I would call it. But even that was all busted up and mangled, wasn't working.
Hey, Alex, I just want to give you a few minute time warning there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Cloudy Lake was tough on fish. So there's just I don't know, we saw this on one of the site visits. Here's a humpy that just couldn't make it through the pipe. You know, this was on the outfall side. Okay. And again, that picture I showed you before, this is the new channel and pipe shown on a plan view and a profile view here. And I wanted to mention that I want to make these design documents available for Marble and for this one. And I'll share any other ones I have too. I'll try to put on the file share for this program, and then I'm always happy to share these documents. Just shows the new culvert location with a lengthened channel, and then this downstream side of the channel here basically ties into the existing channel. So, and then the profile grade there shows you 3% by design. And here's what it looks like during construction. We installed that longer channel. It's kind of wet. It was pretty wet in here, but it was basically just for this, it was excavation and quick stream bed placement through here. So a little bit of wet subgrade was okay as long as it wasn't leaving the site. And this was just basically sitting still on our site. So they were able to cut the stream in pretty quick. Then you got your culvert going in next to the lake here. I put some cut sheets of the sections that we end up constructing to here. Okay, so culvert installation, after it's all bid, we get the permits, convince everyone what we're doing is a good idea, stakeholders, get with the public. We're replacing our culvert in the sections down below. We got to over excavate a little bit. Make sure you have good bedding, your slope is just right. You're setting your culvert in sections. This one was a roll culvert and 20-foot sticks. Usually a fish passage will involve multi-plates that are bolt together. This one didn't need that big of a culvert, and we were able to provide a smaller pipe that just band together. Backfill and compaction, key for any civil construction success. You know, they're bringing it up in lifts with the proper moisture control and mechanical compactors. This is a good one. Another good one, we could implement a road closure to make it the site more accessible, open up in a whole trench all at once instead of having to have a temporary bypass road installed and managed. That kind of stuff just basically slows the contractor down, makes it more expensive. And again, this is you can see a nice, clean, dry trench they're working in. Definitely dealt with the water good here. Another key. Okay. All right, so this is the downstream channel as it's being finished or worked on with willow cuttings. There's some techniques here. Willow cuttings are common use on these stream reconstruction projects but a lot of it has to be buried, right? You're burying about 3/4 of the clipping in the mud, and then it's wrapped with soils and other fabrics, and then capped with what, like you see on the left side here, more veg mat on the top of the stream bank. Another thing, but get it in your specs and remind your contractors before they go and do the work, don't use fertilizer in these areas, right? These plants they don't take well to the nitrogen, I think, and the fertilizer. Willows, like I said before, they take root and they start growing really fast, and in the right conditions can grow several feet in a year. It's just a good bioengineering technique and method. They regenerate themselves, and especially on a narrow creek like this whole thing will probably be shaded in at the end of next summer. Okay, just more info on the Realigned Channel. Here it is with water flowing through it. This is all toward the end of last year. So these are all placed while dormant, and they're basically going to stay dormant this winter, and then everything should start growing in the spring. But we placed a few root wads near the pipe, willows all the way down the creek, veg mat on top of all the willows. And then within the stream channel itself, we always make sure, if you see in those lower details, that we do make some sort of swale or cut by design for a low flow channel during dry periods. And then you'll see on that photo on the upper right, these grade control features where we help create eddies and resting places for the fish, and also to help retain sediment. Okay. Cloudy Lake after. So this was right before freeze up here last fall. The features on this project ended up with a large inlet, a rock and gravel weir against the lake to control the lake levels and the water flows. Low flow channels in the pipe and through the channel. The grade controls I mentioned. Project budget on this one, similar in design cost, and then a little bit smaller in construction, but 300,000 is probably about the cheapest fish passage you're going to get right now. This was a relatively small project, but still almost 400,000 in total. And I was going to point out this, if anyone wants to come see project this summer, this is another good one. Okay. Yeah, and there's just some photos of Salmon actually uses these projects as we're building them or right when we're finished building them. Good evidence of success, and it's pretty typical. And it's good, pretty rewarding to see that. Okay, do I have time for like this 5-minute video? And that's the end.
Yeah, go ahead with the video.
Okay, here we go. This is Riverdale. It's a third project site. Riverdale Road on Cottonwood Creek. This is the site I was talking about with the glaciation that would come over the road and things. But here we are standing in front of it, and there's a cool time lapse and everything. So enjoy.
So this is a fish passage restoration project, basically. We have a large assessment program. It's statewide, and we assess public thoroughfares, so roads, railroads, trails for impediments to fish passage. We replaced the culvert, 2 culverts that were undersized for the size of Cottonwood Creek here, with a much larger culvert and a flood overflow culvert. There will be high velocities to the culverts like there were in the past, and those high velocities are problematic for juvenile salmon. We also put a natural substrate in the bottom. As we speak, there's probably a dozen reds sitting right here getting ready to go up the creek. We're glad to be doing these projects and helping out, you know, the habitat of the fish and the roadways and the flooding issues. And I want to say thanks to Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game and the borough for making these possible. Mat-Su Borough has been one of our most consistent and committed partners. They've replaced over, I think, 75 culverts to date and have, you know, several more in the works. And we just, the scale of the fish passage program in the Mat-Su, I think, is pretty unprecedented, and the commitment to, you know, really seeing through improving fish passage borough-wide.
Okay. This is my last slide, and just 2 projects for this year that I would invite anyone to come out and see with us. There's my contact info. It's also going to be on the cover page of this. Caswell, we have one big one to replace up there, and 3 sites on O'Brien Creek, which is off KGB there in Wasilla. That's it. Any questions?